Let's go.
You're listening to Making Data Simple, where we make the world of data effortless, relevant, and yes, even fun.
All right. Listeners, welcome to the podcast. I am changing it up today. You don't have to listen to me. This is going to be great. I believe in leadership coaches. Sports teams have coaches. Leadership should have coaches. Leaders should have coaches. Most don't, and it's amazing to me. I am a student of leadership. Maybe it's because I'm a slow learner. Go ahead and make your jokes. But with this podcast, I'm turning it over to a very capable host, Catherine Main. She runs our IBM Partner Technical Support Team worldwide, but that's not why she's here. She's here to interview my coach, Lynne Snead. And let me pause on that for a second, by the way. Everyone says they're a coach, but very few really have the experience and credentials like Lynne Snead. So you'll see what I mean when you listen to this podcast. But in this podcast, wow, they hit it on it all. They talk about leadership equaling influence. That's John Maxwell. If you read John Maxwell, which I totally believe in, they talk about the circle of control model, personal values to serve as your personal guidance system, thought management, mindset and energy, stress, atomic habits, mind mapping, and emotional intelligence. You got to listen to this one till the end. You will enjoy it. And let us know what you think. And by the way, tell me if I need to get a jacket. Listen, find out what I mean. Be well.
Let's go.
You're listening to Making...
Wait. We're not doing this again. Catherine, you're up. Let's hear it.
All right. Hey, listeners, I am your guest host today on the Making Data Simple podcast. I am trying to fill the very big shoes of Al Martin. He's given me a few moments and a opportunity to record on his podcast. My name is Lynne Main, and I am an IBMer, and I also work in leadership development coaching. I have the absolute pleasure today of being joined by Lynne Snead, who is the principal and owner of Talent Evolution Systems. She is my coach, and she is a consultant, author, trainer, speaker, leadership coach. She has a background in educational psychology, specializing in organizational performance and development for over 20 years. Huge amounts of talent and knowledge here today. And I'm really excited to be interviewing with her on one of our favorite topics that we have, which is about our personal power. Thank you so much for being on the show. I think it's been 2 years, maybe 3 years since we had you join us, and I'm so happy to have you back today. Anything you want to add to your biography?
Kate, thank you. I am delighted to be back. It was such a treat to do this the first time and then the second time. I do want you to please remind Al that he said if I came back for a third time, there was a jacket. So
I will absolutely remind him of that.
Tell him I'm definitely going for the jacket, but no, this is a treat.
Fantastic. And listeners, we're giving Al a well-deserved vacation. So that's why we don't have him joining with us, joining today. But I'm very, very happy to be here with Lynn. So Lynn, one of the things that you and I were batting around, and this is one of our favorite topics, is really that idea of our personal power and how we think about that. Because I know in a lot of our conversations, we'll go through and try and understand what's in my control to worry about and work on versus what is outside of my control. And we have a model that you and I call the circles model, which is the circle of control, influence, and concern. Do you want to talk to us a little bit about that?
I would love to, because as you know, this is one of my favorite topics of conversation. It has a fascinating background for me, though, because before I started my own business a few years back, I spent nearly 20 years working with Franklin Covey organization. I started with it when it was actually the Franklin Institute, then it became Franklin Quest. Then as a result of the merge, it became Franklin Covey. It was an amazing experience. I had mentors that I worked with every day that, people go buy their books to have a few nuggets from them. Dr. Covey and Stephen Covey Jr., we call him Stephen M.R. He's the one that wrote Speed of Trust. Of course, Stephen Covey Sr., as most people know, wrote 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, which I'll tie back to in just a minute. But the Franklin Day Planner stemmed from the Franklin side of the organization. And I had the absolute honor of working with the founders, Hiram Smith, Dick Winwood, in the very early days of the company. Matter of fact, I was employee number 87. So a little later on, I was one of 5,000, but it was an amazing experience. So I was surrounded by incredible mentors, coaches, teachers, influencers, and my coaching career ever since then has really been my attempt to pay it forward. To carry forward what I had the amazing privilege of learning while I was working with this amazing group of people. And many people will probably recognize the conversation around circle of influence and circle of concern, because that comes from Dr. Covey's book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, which has sold over, I think it's over 50 million copies now. So it's absolutely it's tried and true. It's tried and true. These are principles that withstand the test of time.
That's right.
So, and I was a student and a passionate student and lover of this material before I had the opportunity to go to work for what was then the Franklin Institute. So this
true.
It was
it's like getting to work with your idol. That's amazing.
It was divine intervention because there's no other way to explain it. So I've been exposed to this model for so long, and as we tend to sometimes do when we've been introduced to something, we kind of think, okay, I got that. And the more we think about it, the more we realize this is like you've heard me use the expression before, it's like an onion, but it's a bigger onion than we thought.
Yes.
There's layers and layers and layers to this. I've spent a lifetime studying 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and I'll never master it, but it's worthy of a lifetime of study. But this particular model always had significance and meaning to me because my son, when he was young, as a teenager, he taught me one of his favorite expressions was "duh." It's kind of like, well, duh, Mom. It states the obvious, and we think it's obvious, and yet what's interesting is how often we can lose track of the obvious.
For our listeners who are listening along while you're not commuting and while you're in a safe space, I think to bring this up for the rest of our conversation, you can find this model of what we're going to be talking about on Pinterest. You can Google it. There's lots of visualizations out there. But what we're about to get into is 3 circles. And the smallest circle is the control. Then the bigger circle surrounding it is influence. And the final circle is of concern. So, Lynn, when you're talking about the obvious, I think when people go out and see it, they'll be like, well, yeah, that's obvious.
Right.
It's a duh, but there's so many layers and
the depth of it and how far you can go with it. And really how often we kind of forget to see things through that lens. I think that's all very important. We all do on occasion. The interesting thing is that Dr. Covey's model started with the 2 circles, the circle of influence and circle of concern. But what we have to realize is it came in the 7 Habits book right in the front chapter on habit number 1, be proactive. So the whole conversation that this stemmed from Dr. Covey was learning the difference between reactive and proactive, and that we can be proactive more often than we sometimes realize. And, you and I have talked about the language that we try to help our people with as lead, because, I'm always talking about leader as coach. Good leaders are coaches. And sometimes we hear our folks using reactive language, nothing I can do about that, or I can't do it, or I can't, whatever the sentence starts with, I can't. And what we're trying to do is shift the mindset a bit to what can we do? What are the possibilities? What are the options? What would help? Who could help? Just things to pull us out of that trap of reactive language. And it's from that conversation that the original model took place. And it was many years later before I realized that just to aid in the explanation of the model, it helped to envision this inner circle that I came to call the circle of personal control. What can I do? What is up to me? And I was thinking I was pretty clever and that I had invented that idea. And I jumped into Pinterest one day and found 5,000 copies of it. So I obviously was not the only one thinking that this made sense. So here's kind of a way to think about this. all we have to do is spend a minute looking at the news or social media or go to work for a day, and we realize there's many, many things out there that concern us. But when we think about it from the standpoint of what can I do about it, many times the answer is absolutely nothing. Nothing I can do about that. And we don't like that answer, but it's just often true. Mm-hmm. Now, these are concentric circles, okay? So the second inner circle, as part of the original model, is the circle of influence. So it helps us to start looking at, but what could I do to influence this situation? Is there anything I can do to influence it? And Dr. Covey shows a couple of versions of the model where what he's trying to demonstrate is we're in essence trying to increase the size of that influence circle so that it's bigger. We're becoming influencers. We're becoming proactive in recognizing what we can do and that we can often do more than we may realize. And that as we do that, the outer circle shrinks. The outer circle gets smaller as we become better influencers.
That big outer circle, that's that circle of concern. So that's the biggest circle. And then we close the aperture a little bit to that circle of influence. And the original premise was to think, how big can we make that circle of influence? How big can we exert ourselves in this circle of influence?
I love your connection to aperture because that makes the image very, very clear. I really like that. So what we've done is to acknowledge something I think is very important. The more I've used this over just the last few years, and I've been doing this for more than a few years, yes. is recognizing that there's so much more power to this model than I realized in the outer layers of the onion. When we get to the inner circle, and I call it the circle of control, we have to take a look at, before we even think about influence, what is it we actually control? Now, I've had some fun with this working with some clients because when I start to introduce it, I'll say to them, just I'll give you a quiet moment and write down a quick list of things that you think of that you can control. And it's funny to watch people's reactions to that because I'll have people start writing and they'll write down several things. And I've seen people that would write down maybe one or two things and they were done.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, let's see if we can't expand our thinking on that a little bit. And by the way, it's one of the reasons I love Pinterest because you can look up just circle of control in Pinterest and you've got all kinds of models. And when I have people do that and take a look at the different models, they're like, oh yeah, oh, okay, there's more there than I first thought. Mm-hmm. We're talking about everything, but yeah, dive in.
That's a really important point because we often think of what's in our control as being really small. That's my default because I can control my thoughts. I can generally control my behavior. I can control what I say. And that feels small. Mm-hmm. But I think what you're saying is that it's also actually bigger than that to a degree. There's other things that are within your control. And so really identifying for yourself what is in your control versus what is in your influence versus what is in your concern, going back to that first principle of how we can be proactive. And so the more you can get clear on what's in your control and what's in your influence, the more agency you have and the more proactive you can be. That's the whole idea from a leadership perspective, right?
And that's well put. I like the term agency. Mm-hmm. And for many people, they get this, they're thinking, duh. And for other people, they're probably thinking, okay, yeah, good point. I hadn't thought of too many things in that circle of control. But when we think about attitudes and emotions and our words,
huge.
Because we talk a lot about conversational intelligence, and how to have difficult conversations in a very constructive way. What we say is important. How we say it's probably more important. So how we say it, this is largely about our social emotional intelligence in how we say things, and that's something that we control. We control our choices, our opinion of ourselves. That's something I spend a lot of time with my clients talking about is how we feel about ourselves. What language do we use as we think about ourselves? And are there things that we can do to kind of remap or re-record, I guess, the old tapes, the old recordings? of maybe self-talk that isn't as constructive or helpful for us as it might be. And recognizing that we can, that's up to us. That's up to us. We may not control it at the moment, but we can influence it. But here was a that happened just in the last few years as you and I have worked more and more with this and with more and more clients. I realize that the times that we're thinking about influence, how do I influence a situation? How do I influence a person? To even have that conversation with ourselves, we had to go to the inner circle first.
Yes.
Okay, so something, we observe it, it concerns us. We're thinking, well, wait a minute, is there anything I can do about that? Yes or no? Well, okay, we go right into that inner circle and we think, well, could I influence it? Who could I talk to? Who could I donate to? Who could I present to? Who else could I involve who might help me? And then we're also thinking, yeah, but is it worth it? Do I want to? Is that feasible? And if we say yes to any of it, we've just stepped out from that center circle into that circle of influence because we made a choice. We made a decision to do something to try to influence. Now, that something can be any one of a number of things. It can be a little thing, it can be a big thing, but we had to go to the inner circle first to then step back out into that circle of influence. The fascinating thing, and you and I have talked a lot about this, is realizing, and I like Dr. Covey's model in this regard, when we're thinking about the circle of concern in our life, how big is that circle? And in other words, how much of our time, effort, and attention is it getting? And we've had fun with some PowerPoint models showing that as huge and the inner circle as something that we envision as little teeny tiny. And sometimes we've shown it as kind of bouncing off the page. Whereas what we want to have happen is when we realize that something is in the circle of concern, meaning it may concern us, but there is not a darn thing we can do about it, is to help ourselves learn to more quickly let that go. And not spend 80% of our time, effort, and energy, our time, because effort and energy isn't going to work if we can't influence anything, it is we're wasting so much of our energy in a place where we really can't do anything about it. And as we recognize that and step away from that time, our inner circle grows. Our personal power grows. We're making better choices, maybe less time, searching social media, news, less there and more about what are my choices? What are the things I choose to do? We spend a lot of time talking about the importance of knowing our own values. What are our personal guiding values? Because it's like a governance system for how we choose to live our life. And that has been such a powerful experience to help coach other people on, because so many people have not given much thought to actually clarifying and writing their own personal guidance system, their personal values, guiding principles.
So to take a step back and to kind of reframe it for me, because I get the pleasure of speaking with you about this. I work in an environment and we live in a world where there's a ton of urgency and drama, but also a lot of ambiguity, right? Especially in modern business today, especially in tech, things are moving so fast and there's so much ambiguity, and you have your one little slice that you can see. But in my mind, being clear on what ambiguity and what I'm hearing and all the things going on, that sits in the circle of concern. That's that outermost circle that I have the least amount of influence and control over, right? So when we talk about taking back that energy, for me, it's about reframing and refocusing to be more powerful and more positively influence outcomes by taking energy away from worrying about that, thinking about that, which really allows me to be more effective on the things in a more immediate way, not only within my circle of concern, so the innermost circle, but really on that influence. Because the more I get along in business and the more you and I talk about it, it does come down to influence. It comes down to
Yes.
who am I going to reach out to today? How am I going to progress this one step forward? Because everything as we apply in our business lives is basically a project, as you and I have talked about. It has a
Right.
beginning, middle, and end. So how can I increase the power and effectiveness of where I can influence in
Right.
order to make that happen? And I guess what it really comes down to for me when I think about somebody listening to this, they're like, okay, got it. We have what I can control, we have what I can influence, and then we have everything else, which is traffic, weather, crazy stuff that may or may not be happening in my business. That's in the concern. But isn't this, Lynn, really at the end of the day, in addition to what you were saying about our values, but I want to take a sidestep for a minute and talk about thought management. Because
Thank
isn't
you.
this really about developing
Thank you.
our ability to listen and
Yeah.
manage those thoughts?
That's one of my favorite terms. I love the term thought management. And it's something that I know for myself for a long time, that just never occurred to me as a possibility. And I think a lot of people are in such a reactive mode until they recognize that and choose to come out of it, that we think of our thoughts and feelings as things we don't control. Well, yeah, we do. Now, maybe we influence first before we control. There's a little learning curve there. But thought management is critical for us to realize that that's in our circle of control. And it has to do with our mindset. It has to do with our attitude and how we approach things. It comes back to energy. And we are energy beings. When we walk into a room, someone feels the energy that we bring in with us. Mm-hmm. And we know what it's like when somebody walks in the room and we're thinking, oh dear, mercy. Or somebody just
collapse,
sucks the air right out of the room. I call those, Hoover vacuum cleaners. And people who walk into a room and it brightens the room. There's an energy that comes in the door almost before they do that. Well, we're responsible for our energy, and we're responsible for understanding that our energy impacts everybody that we come in contact with. Now, for leaders, it's really important to get this. My favorite John Maxwell quote, you've heard me say this many times. He says, if you think you're a leader, you turn around and look behind you and there's nobody there, you're only out for a walk.
I love that. We've talked about it from who lines up on the sidewalk behind you, even when they don't have to. That's a leadership, right?
That's leadership. When they follow voluntarily because they recognize that you are the leader who understands the vision, how the vision fits into the line of sight to mission, which we talk about a lot, and how to convey that vision to everybody on your team so that everybody's on the same page of the same vision. That vision doesn't mean 100 different things to 100 different people. And they see that you're the one that knows how to help every one of us get there. And that's when they line up behind you. Now, my context was always project management. And in project management, you're not necessarily the boss. You may be the project manager, but you're not necessarily the boss. So why would people follow you? Well, when they know that, first of all, you're a coach, you're a mentor, but you're the holder of the vision, you have the expertise to help everybody get there and everybody to be successful together and make it a team venture. They will line up behind you all day long. When they feel heard, respected, and doesn't necessarily mean we agree with them, but when they know they were heard and they're treated respectfully, and they know that you're going someplace that matters, they'll sign up to come along all the time.
And isn't that, the metaphor continues, isn't that lining up on the sidewalk the visualization of influence? That's influence, right?
That's influence. That's influence.
That's influence.
And the more we recognize that influence is something that we can learn more and more about every single day. Influence is something we can study, we can practice, we can read about. You know me, I'm big on the books.
I know. I love the
And,
books. Bring it on. What books?
I'm always amazed at leaders who don't spend much time reading or studying about leadership, because there's whatever subject matter expertise brought them into a leadership position to begin with. But once they're in leadership positions, you need to also add to your body of knowledge more about the leadership role. And many leaders don't do that. There's a big difference in my mind between being a manager, because you got a promotion, versus being a leader. So reading about influence, studying about influence, there's so many things that we can do to learn the constructive, positive, non-manipulative ways to influence. And while we're at it, we're influencing ourselves. We're learning ourselves.
Yeah. A couple of things. One, you told me about a book that I'm working my way through by John A. Daly called Advocacy.
Yes.
And that has just been an absolutely wonderful, practical read that talks end to end of not about influence per se, but about how to successfully advocate for ideas,
yes,
which is tied to influence, obviously. But that's a really nice book for people to leverage.
That's a very powerful book. It's a bit of a doorstop, but don't let that intimidate you, because it's very readable. There's what's in there is worth it. It's worthwhile. But one of the obvious places to start, always in my mind, is 7 Habits of Highly Effective People.
Of course, that should be an annual read.
That's
right?
It. Honestly could be an annual read or listen. I prefer audio.
Yeah, it all counts. Getting the words in.
It all counts. Yep. And it honestly could be an annual adventure, because you pick up a new layer. There's more depth than we realize. And there's habits that I studied that I feel like I got pretty good at pretty quickly. And there's habits that to this day, and I won't tell you how many years this has been, that I know I still suck at, but I'm still working on it. And, that this ties to attitude, that attitude ties to energy, that energy is magnetic. We will either attract or repel people in our life based on our energy. All of that is within this circle of control. Al and I used to talk about mindset and the importance of mindset a lot. And when you pay attention to it, you start to pick up on other people's mindset pretty quickly, and our own while we're at it. So we start to recognize, and then we see things in others that help us learn ourselves, either what we want to do or not do. I've had amazing mentors in my life that taught me what to do. One of the very first bosses I had in my professional career many, many years ago was a great example of what not to do. I came away from 2 years working at that company thinking I now know what I don't want to be like as I grow into my leadership role. We need both. But recognizing that our personal power is much greater than we probably gave it credit for. And what can we do to shift more energy there and come out being very proactive and very successful as positive influencers?
Yes, because at the end of the day, in business or in life, we're all trying to get more positive outcomes. I don't think anybody would sit there and say, I am actively trying to make things worse, or I actively want my life to be worse, right? So getting really clear, kind of stringing together some of the concepts we've talked about today, is we've talked about trying to understand what's in your circle of control, and that's ourself. You have one great word that we've talked about, which is responsible. I'm responsible about my thoughts, attitudes, words, and probably most importantly, our actions, right? What we choose to do that. And so our thought management goes to that, which goes to our mindset. That mindset and that positive energy, focusing on what we can take action on, being proactive, going back to Covey's first principle, leads us to influence. And so our goal is to try and make that influence as big as we possibly can. And influence is external things, but are close to us.
Mm.
right? Coworkers, family, charity, things like that.
Mm.
And then minimize the amount of energy we spend on that really, really big circle of concern, which I think is diffuse, but it really is easy to suck us in. When the aperture is open really wide, we see everything. It's
Yes.
like, whoa, lots coming at you.
And the word that we haven't used yet, though, that is so much a part of this is the word stress.
Yes. Yep.
That outer circle is our stress feeder. And if we're spending 80% of our time and energy there, no wonder I want to flip that. I want very little percentage of my time out there. And by the way, sometimes that can be hard.
It's a process to undo that. And I think it's really, I mean, you mentioned before, take a minute to write down what's in your circle of control and be surprised or not at what you have in there. But what you're saying is evaluate your time spent and your percentage of energy spent. And if it's 80% out there, continue. But if it's 80% out in your concern, that's probably not where we want to be.
It's not where we want to be. And we can flip that switch and put the 80% in the middle. And that changes everything for us. That if we're 80% in that center circle of our circle of personal control, and that leads us to becoming better, more constructive influencers, that's a big change in our life.
You know, I'm going to tie a concept together that we haven't talked about, but I was reading James Clear has a newsletter that he sends out.
Atomic Habits. Love his stuff.
Love his stuff. He had a newsletter today, and he says in the newsletter I have the privilege of working with wildly smart people. And he said the problem with smart people is they come up with a really good reason for not doing anything, because they're able to see all of these risks, right? And a lot of those risks sometimes fall into that concern category for me, not in our control. Like they're real, they may happen, but their likelihood to happen is so low as to not being meaningful. And yet we take a lot of energy, especially I feel like the smarter we are, we take a lot of energy at identifying all the reasons why it won't work. We talk ourselves out of the idea. And I think I would like your input on how we go ahead and take action, even if we have a lot of noise from this circle of concern or we see a lot of risks. How do we go ahead?
Oh, that's a really good point. A really good question, because, you know, the smart person syndrome, it's interesting because smart people can see so many options that others don't see. There's possibility upon possibility, and not just risk, but from a standpoint of, oh, we could do this, we could do that, we could do that. You know, a million things going through that intelligent brain can lead to analysis paralysis.
Yes.
And, you know, we talk a lot about the risk analysis process when we talk about project management, because there's two elements we have to look at. And fortunately, we can do it mathematically. We can do the same thing in our own decision-making process. There's, on a scale of 1 to 5, how big a risk is it? A 1 is, okay, no big deal. A 5 is catastrophic. The project would not be successful. But there's also how likely is it, which you just touched upon, that's critical. And a 5 is, this is really likely to be a problem. A 1 is, no, that earthquake the day of the project launch is just not that likely. So 1 times 5 is 5. 5 times 5 is 25. So you've got scores that go from 1 to 25 on this nice little chart that you can build for yourself. I also, I love the process of mind mapping. Mind mapping is nonlinear brainstorming. You can find a ton on that by Googling on it. And by staying in a nonlinear process before we try to go to outline and organize, we're in a creative mode first, as opposed to being in an editor organizational mode first, which clamps down the creativity. So to be able to mind map and get ideas on paper in kind of a start anywhere, go anywhere fashion, and then look at, okay, what's real here? What's a 5 by 5? And what's a 1 by 1? And of those, not saying that we have to go low risk on everything, but let's just eliminate the high end of things. And then to put a value.
Risk is kind of like the concern, right? Because you can kind of
Yes.
think about it in concern. So if it's a
Right.
low risk, low likelihood, that's a concern.
Yeah.
Don't worry about it. Go ahead.
Yeah. Or and the flip side, and this is where our talk about behaviors has been helpful, because some people are just good at thinking, yeah, well, that might happen, but we could handle it.
Yes.
And there's that kind of a pattern versus the pattern of, oh, let's not make a move because there's so many reasons it might not work.
Right.
Which is why I think there's multiple people in our world, and we're supposed to come together and harmonize a little bit on working together. Dr. Covey would refer to it as, of course, synergize, and get all these talents together. Those that are good at the analysis and those are good at, yeah, let's pick that one and move forward. So sometimes we need more people to zero in on what are the things that we're going to proactively pursue that are going to give us the best result in the end.
Everybody has value to the conversation. It's just knowing what that value is and when is the right time to apply it and how to harness it the best.
Right. Exactly.
So this has been so fun. I wish
Always.
we could go on for hours and hours and hours, but I kind of want to bring us home in the next few minutes and restate what we were here to talk about today. So I am passionate about the benefit I have had from thinking about my own leadership style, my own ability to focus, my own ability to positively influence outcomes in terms of the different circles. And I'm not sure if I said it before. Al can always always edit it out through his influence if I have, but what I can control are things like my thoughts and attitudes. That's that thought management, my focus, decisions and choices, how I handle my emotions. So those are things around the inner core. And I encourage our listeners to go out and Google and find that right set with that guiding principles of your values. But then as we talk about how to go out in the world, our personal world and in our work world, that's really about influence. And it's about taking positive, proactive action with a mindset that is looking for the next action to take, that proactive kind of mindset. So that's what we really talked about today, about how to increase our influence and what that looks like as a leader when people are lined up on the sidewalk behind you.
I want to add one more piece to it, because in thinking about influencing, I always like to pair that with the thought and understanding of social emotional intelligence. And there's a ton of books and things out there on social and emotional intelligence. And as I was encouraging leaders to read more a bit ago, please add that to your worthwhile topic list, because it's so critical for leaders to be able to influence in a way that has integrity, that will build followership. And that is key. We're not talking influence as a way to manipulate. So we really need to, as leaders, focus on being trusted leaders, integrous leaders. So how we influence is one of our greatest responsibilities.
That is profound and well said. And to have more energy to do this, because I can hear every person listening to this, like, where am I going to get the time and energy to do this? You take it back. You have time to read another book when you take back that time spent in the concern, in what other people are doing, what other people are thinking, things in the past, the weather, existential crises, right? When you take it back, you have more energy to think about how you can influence.
You absolutely do. It makes that big a difference. And one thing I've recommended to several clients over the years, especially lately, and I've gotten good feedback about this, trade that 30 minutes at bedtime that we too often spend surfing, and trade it for 30 minutes of an audiobook or 30 minutes of reading at bedtime, one of these books. You will sleep better. And when you look back, as I can, over a long professional career, other than the fact that I had amazing mentors to work with, so much of what I've learned and been able to share forward has come from my library. Mm-hmm. And what I've read. Now, these are experts that have spent years learning what they then spent probably years writing. And we can, in a few hours, digest all that knowledge. That, to me, is pretty remarkable and pretty powerful.
It's so great because they have distilled it down to the most meaningful points for you. And you don't have to put in all of the energy to go learn all the stuff just to find the meaningful points. Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah.
And I've had a few folks that I've worked with say, I'm just not a book reader. And I said, well, I doubt that you're a fan of learning everything the hard way. So
I don't know. Sometimes I feel like I have to learn it. But yes, I'm not a fan
of course
of
we
it
do.
every time I do.
Of course we do. But less of that. I'm a fan of less of that. Yeah, because it's an amazing way to learn, but I'm not a fan of doing just that. So
yes,
read, study, learn, or be left behind is the phrase I used to use at the end of my seminars.
Read, study, learn,
or be left behind.
Or be left behind. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh, there's so much to unpack. We'll come back another time because I want to talk about the investment next time in developing those leadership skills, because that's a whole great topic that we didn't get
it's a wonderful topic. I'd love to.
We will come back and do that. I can't wait. I'll see if I can get Al to go on vacation again so I get another hour of his listenership. But thank you so much. And listeners,
you are so welcome.
I really appreciate it.
Tell Al I can't wait to see my jacket.
I know. Third time.
Three stars. Yep.
3 stars gets the jacket.
I love it. All right. So good luck to everybody. Leaders matter. Leaders matter.
And focus on the right things that you can control, you can influence, and de-emphasize all that stuff in the big circle of concern. It's just noise.
Yeah. And help your people learn the same concepts, the same principles.
We'll get better business outcomes.
Leaders means being coaches and teaching and sharing and helping our people grow.
Listeners, thank you so much for allowing me to guest on Al's podcast, Making Data Simple. Al, big shout out to you. Thank you for having me on. We will put all the resources that we discussed today, the books, we'll put some links to the materials so that you can go out and look. But again, very easy to find on Pinterest. And with that, we'll close it out. Thanks, Lynn. We'll see you later.
You're welcome. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.